on. It's 8 o'clock. This chatting is good, but I think we need to stay on text. So Lee, I think, is still trying to connect. And so I'm going to go ahead and start us.
This is the Math Map Book Club, where ordinary parents
Oops.
encourage one another to develop an extraordinary appreciation of math. We love what we know and struggle over the unfamiliar. Through weekly conversation and exploration among friends, we can begin to enjoy ideas that seem difficult. Join our book club as we discover how math helps us to know God and to make him known.
Get the pictures back. And I'm not seeing Lee as being able to join in. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk and get us started. So welcome to our book club. This is our last one. Sadly, this is the last one we will have for the summer break. So hopefully everybody will put on their calendar to come back in August. If you missed some of them, it's a great opportunity to go back and revisit those and then join us in August. So I'm going to go ahead and get us going here. Oh, there we go. All right. So for our exordium this week, I thought we would go ahead and look at this incredibly beautiful piece of art. I'm not biased, although I do have a ballerina. So it does feel kind of near and dear to my heart. But let's take a minute and you can share anything you'd like. But the question I'd like you to think about as you look at this, and we're talking about assessment, the title is the ballet class. Look at the different students and how could you interpret the different attitudes that they have towards assessment?
We cannot see your screen.
We don't have it
Oh,
yet.
I haven't shared my screen. Well, there we go. Let me remedy that. I'm glad somebody said that I was. There we go. Okay. Now you can see my screen. Sorry about that. All right. So here we go. The ballet class. It's a Degas. And like I said, share anything that you want to share, but thinking about assessment, what are some attitudes that some of these dancers may be displaying towards assessment, or how may they be interacting with that assessment?
I just remember my brief career as a dancer and being told that if the teacher isn't assessing and correcting you, that you're not worthy of being corrected. You're just so wrong. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm like, well, you can at least give me something. So it's like it was disheartening when you weren't corrected. The girl in the little yellow bow looks exhausted.
Oh, the little girl in the yellow bow, I was thinking looks like my 7-year-old when I say, let's do something again. And it's, oh.
And she definitely has that. Oh.
She has her nose up in the air.
What else do you see in the picture?
It looks as though some girls are still in motion or still doing things, whereas others are relaxing on the sidelines. And my question is, are they doing it because it's just their turn, or is it because they needed extra practice, or they were doing so well that they're showing off for the others? I love the stance of the teacher. He knows he's in charge. He's got it, and he's got his stick to prove it.
How about the ones that are off to the side? What do you, what are some of the attitudes as they're standing off to the side? What are some different ways that they're?
Right above the teacher's hand, it looks like those two are like doing a waltz or something together.
It does look like they're interacting somehow.
Yeah, they've got their hands like they're doing a waltz or a more traditional dance, not ballet, which is how they're dressed. They're dressed for ballet.
In the very back, I see probably what looks like it could be maybe an assistant to the instructor. And she has her arms wrapped around one of the other dancers as though maybe that dancer had been scolded for something she was doing incorrectly. And the assistant is making her feel it was just, what's the word I'm looking for, making her just comforting
Her
her.
reassurance.
Yeah.
So so a lot of what we've said, right, whether it's the girl with her chin up or the girl that looks like she's needing to be consoled in the back, are these positive feelings about assessment?
Not all of them.
No, I can't say that anybody looks overly receptive necessarily, or even concerned.
And there's the
guys
girl with her
hear me?
hands on her hips. And another girl who's doing this, which could be mocking.
Can you guys hear me at all?
Yes.
We can.
I'm on my phone. Oh, it's echoing. Oh, well, I think I'll give up and just watch.
It doesn't look to me like this is a new experience for any of them. You know, it looks like they've done this before. They don't seem surprised that this is what's happening. The fact that somebody would huff or talk to their neighbor means that they don't have that initial intimidation that you sometimes have, you know, your first time in a place.
I think you can watch an assessment sometimes with an attitude of humility and being able to learn from it, and you can watch an assessment with an attitude of trying to be better or greater, or like with more of a darker heart. So, you know, it could be that some of these girls look to me like they're, you know, looking at the assessment as, oh, they're not as good as me, or, oh, I'm so upset they're better than me, or something like that, you know?
Lee typed in the chat box, have we determined that the girl in the center is the one being assessed? So the one there kind of in front of the mirror, closer to us.
It does look like he's looking at her, doesn't it? And she's
kind of
in B flat. I'm going to show off my ballet knowledge. I'm pretty sure that's called B flat.
She's the only one engaged with the teacher, that's for sure.
She does look like it. So as we look at this, I just think it's interesting, right, to maybe when we talk about this with our students, is to draw out what are some of their attitudes towards assessment, right? Is it something that we're doing regularly enough that we're not apprehensive, that we can kind of be like, oh, it's time for this? Are we, or do we get anxious about it because there's some sort of leveling, right? So as our pride gets involved, are we trying to be better, or do we think there's some way we have to be? Are we, if there's some kind of assessment that is public, are we learning from other people's corrections? Right. I will brag about my daughter because she doesn't get it from me. And it is not something I've taught her. This is entirely the work of the Spirit in her life. But she is one of the most humble people I know when she's in the dance studio, because she's always saying, I can always learn. If I'm in a beginner, she's like, I will take any class because I know I can always learn. Right. If I'm not dancing, she'll take notes. She'll have her notebook and she broke her ankle a few years ago, and she went to every single class and she took notes and she wrote things down and wrote corrections down, right? So she was engaged, even though she wasn't being assessed, as people were being assessed, as advances were being assessed, right? She was going, this is an opportunity to learn, right? I will be honest, and that is not me. I know that, you know, hopefully the Lord is making me more humble, right? That I'm progressing in that direction. But I know I'd be one of the more competitive ones that would want to be like, let me show you what I can do, right? So, so I just think it's a fun thing to think about, right? When we look at this, right? Who do we identify with in the room, right? And how do we see assessment? And I would just say 2 things I never noticed before tonight: the watering can and the dog.
The dog.
And just as I said that about the watering can, it made me think, and I don't know that God meant this at all, but I'm just thinking about this, right? That assessment is a way that we grow, right? Assessment is a way that God, right? When we think about our own spiritual assessment, whether it's a self-assessment, right? Or God bringing somebody in, right? That assessment is one of the things that helps us to grow, because we recognize where maybe we've gotten off course, or maybe where we need to head, right? And just like things need to be watered, right? They need to be watered. And sometimes, you know, I planted a bunch of plants yesterday, and I've got the hose pipe on those plants, and I'm trying not to like squash them, but some of them I'm like, you're little and you're going to get squashed by this force of water that is life-giving, but it's going to feel like it squashes you at first, right? But it ultimately is life-giving. And so maybe we can help our students see that sometimes, right? Sometimes when we're being washed and cleansed, it can feel more like we're being waterboarded, but really we're being given life. So, all right. So this week, here we go. Let me put the slide. This week, as we look at the math map, we're still in 2D. This is going to be our longest stretch in the math map is 2D. And probably the bulk of what we think of as high school mathematics, right, is in these weeks of 2D. And what we're trying to do through the math map, right, of course, is parse that out and say, okay, here's the grammar that we can be working on early, the things that you can memorize. You don't have to connect them or understand them, or just memorizing them, so that when you get to those dialectic years, and as you begin challenge, now you're ready to start making connections between this grammar that is now familiar to you. Okay. One of the drawbacks to that is that parents, right? Parents are here, kids are here, right? They're happy being grammarians. Parents are up here going, well, I've seen this before. I should be dialectic or rhetoric. And so they're trying to understand it all. And right, we're going to have to really work, I think, especially as we roll out the math map, to help parents rest in where their children are, where their students are, especially if they're not in challenge yet, right? Or if it's their first year in the math map, just rest in the grammar that we're introducing those first early years. But I wanted to point out here, right? So we have assessment, and it's not just that, oh, it's Blue Book week, so we have to have week 15 be assessment, but periodic assessment, right, is important for that opportunity to celebrate and make course corrections. And so we may have more informal assessments going on, right? We know we do progress reports halfway through for challenge students, right? Those informal assessments that we do every week. That's really important, but it's also important to stop sometimes and pause and have a more formal assessment and say, what's going well? And let's celebrate that. And what can we do better, right? How could we change course, or what can we do here? We kind of, right, we got into that, like, I just got to get through the end of the semester. Let's pause and say, how do we want to start the next one? So I just wanted to point that out, that it wasn't just, oh, it's Blue Book week, but it is purposeful that we have assessment in the middle of the year. And I don't know why it takes so long, but here's the next slide. Right. We are on lesson 15, assessment, right? And so that's where we're going to break for the summer, and then we will come back for second semester. So tonight we're talking about assessment. And so I thought I've pulled out some things here on the left-hand side, just to give you an idea of some of the things that are in the charts for this week. Remember, those charts are the same for all 13 levels of the math map. And so we try to give some ideas in this week about how to assess in general, but also how to assess mathematically. And so we can talk about these things, but I really wanted to open it up and look at our questions, right? Who are we assessing, right? So let's think about that for a minute. When we're talking about blue books and assessment, who is it that we're assessing?
The student and herself. Everyone involved can be assessed.
Good. Yeah. Right. So the clear thing there, well, kids taking the blue book, but you're right. As a Challenge A tutor, I always felt like the blue book was really the week before when we would review for the blue book, and I would see what the conversation was like. And then I was assessing myself to know, wow, how well have I prepared this class, right? Regardless of what they did when they sat down. Right. As a parent, right, it's an opportunity to sit and say, okay, what have I done well? What can I change? And then obviously our student, right? How well are they learning? So why are we assessing?
Without assessment, you can end up in the wrong place.
Okay, so that's a good reason, right? Am I going the right direction? Why else do we assess?
To know what you can do better, how to improve. And also to know what I'm doing well. What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong?
Okay.
We said assessing our honor. Do we prepare, and is the work our own?
Jana, you look like you're thinking something.
Yeah, I've been thinking about we use the 5 canons of rhetoric to assess all the time in Challenge, and Donna just said we assess to know what we're doing well, because that's encouraging to see that we're getting things and we are understanding and we are learning, and then like what we can work on. I like the easy +1, like we've got this down, but now here's something we can build on that. Yeah. I was kind of expecting to maybe see the 5 canons of rhetoric here somehow. So I'm looking, that's kind of what I was doing when you saw me thinking, seeing it.
Hold that thought. We've got it coming up. Right. Could the why be different for each of our children? Right. Depending on where our children is, our why could be different. We might have many whys, right? But before I start talking about the what, I probably want to think about the why, right? Why am I assessing my child? Am I just doing it because it's week 15? Am I just doing it because the state says I have to have an annual normed test? Right? I want to know why. Right? Why am I doing this? And I think especially for challenge age students who are starting to ask those questions, right? Younger students, they tend to do what you ask them to do, right? But as our students get older, helping them to participate, right, by knowing the why, right? So if you think about those ballerinas, right, if it's just a competition, right, then maybe the ones who have no hope, right? I'm just thinking of Donna going, I didn't get corrections, right? So maybe they think, well, I don't even need to worry about this because it's not going to affect me, right? If it's just for competition. If it's, oh, we're going to perform this show, then maybe everybody really wants to know, right? Because if the instructor changes the person next to me, I need to know, right? If their positioning changes, I need to know how that impacts me, right? So understanding that why is going to inform our what, but it's also going to perhaps give us some ways to engage our students in their own assessment. Once we know why, then we can look at the what, right? And I get the sense that there's a lot of challenge directors on here, right, who are used to assessing. Do we, and some classes do, some classes don't, right? So when I was tutoring, parents would edit the questions for their students, and every student would have their own blue book, right? Because each student may have a different thing that needs to be assessed, right? If I have one student who is like super great at computation, and they know they're really great at computation, but they're not good at writing down things, maybe part of my assessment becomes, I'm assessing how well you write down all your steps, not whether you get the right answer or not, right? And so what we assess can change depending on my why and depending on my who, right? And then the how, the when, and the where, right? So we're not going to go over that, what we talk about in the math map about the how and the different kinds of paper and the different types of questions, although they're in there. So you've got so much to look forward to, right? But does the when and the where matter? Does anybody have assessment anxious students?
I think especially in challenge A, when it's their first exposure to a blue book, that first blue book experience is a chance for parents and students to be anxious, and then to, on the other side of it, say, oh, that wasn't so bad. It's sort of a gate they have to pass through. And so that week 14 prep that you were talking about, how you just having that conversation is a great time to, they didn't even know that was a when or the where maybe, but it was built in there to let them know this is a lot like what your blue book will be like. This conversation right here, you're ready. And knowing, so I do think that there's definitely some anxiety possibilities.
Yeah, and so, for tutors, we're sort of stuck, right? It's going to happen on week 15 in community, and it's going to happen wherever your class meets. But we can encourage parents, right? That is the blue book that they do in class the only assessment that should go on.
I mean, every time they do a rhetorical assignment, we try and assess on the spot. Like, you don't even want to wait till another student's on. You want to do it on the spot. We always ask them, what did you do well? And what can you improve on?
And it's good practice to have planned assessment time too. I think the week 15, like students know all semester this is coming, and I think it's helpful to have that and to have spontaneous assessment that just feels like this is a teaching moment. This is a moment we can talk about something that really went well, or it's something we could work on for next time.
Yeah, I like that having that planned assessment time that they know is coming, right? I think is good too.
I think if we maybe begin to use the word assessment more often, it can take some of the mystery out of that word. So if parents, when they're reading the paper before they let their child turn it in essentials or in challenge, if they say, let's assess this together, if they start using that word, if we start using that word, it might make that word more familiar and part of our lives. I remember in in essentials, one of the things that I felt was really successful was telling my kids, we're going to test how your outline served you. So if your outline failed you, if you were not able from your outline to retell the story, then we need to work on the outline. So identifying where the gap was by assessing a
Jill, you froze. So until you come back, I just realized.
and
Oh,
they
go
didn't take
ahead.
it as personally because we weren't assessing them. We started, oh yeah. Am I good now?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, I will leave and come back in a second. But I think when I do that, when you're talking about the when and the where, when I do that at home and when I do that regularly with my students, then they are assessing the tools they're using and knowing if they're using them well. And it's a little less personal.
I think that's really great, Jill, what you just said. And probably you guys have heard me say this again, but I heard it, and it was my thing when I flipped from saying this is hard or easy to familiar and unfamiliar. Or when we talk about math, this guy said, look, don't ever say this is easy. Don't ever say this is simple. Don't ever tell your students, oh, you'll get this. Because if they don't, the problem is with them. Right. And he said, math is hard. Just be upfront about it. Say math is hard, but you can do this with some work and some effort. You can do this, and be upfront. And so I think that kind of goes along with what you were saying, Jill, right? That when we help them to see assessment isn't necessarily personal, but assessing the tools that they have or how they use the tools, right? That it becomes, and if it becomes a regular part of what we're doing, right, then it makes sense. So I'm just going to take a minute because I am not good at balancing the people who are on my screen with the chat box. But I just want to make sure everybody got a chance to see this, right? So Lee said she took the grandkids driving on the farm this weekend, and all they wanted was assessment, right? They would say, did I do that right, Nana? Right? As they avoided walls, trees, and fences. So they were looking back, they were looking for that feedback, right? Because it wasn't a scary thing. They knew it was going to be a celebration because they'd done it. Jana, I love your Jesus's words there, right? That we have to become like a little child, willing for direction and correction. That's such a great reminder, right? Yes, Donna, right? If we're not careful, we might watch the wrong way that the sun is going. And then I'm just going to quickly look. Somebody recommends Robert's podcast, our honor, small course corrections. Yes, Michelle, I love that how they responded was a heart response, right? That their response to assessment is a heart response. And that may be, right? So when I sat there and said, my response to assessment is often a prideful one, right? That maybe through assessments, God is working on my pride, right? Less than my skills. And so that's a self-assessment, right? When we recognize that.
I keep thinking too, as you're finishing reading the chats, I remember Lee talking something that I listened to about assessing whether a student, if they're struggling, assessing whether, is it a grammar thing? Like, do they just not have the vocabulary? Do they not know these terms? Or is it dialectic? Or is it a rhetorical thing? They just can't tell me, they can't tell it back to me. Or is it a heart issue? And like assessing to determine where the gap is, where the problem is, enables us to help our student much.
Yes, I think that's an excellent way of putting that, Jana. So
it is Lee's words, I'm sure. I heard it from her.
Michelle said that she always asks students what they would like to be assessed on. There's actually a whole movement in higher education now about, well, standards-based grading, but also students self-assessing themselves and students giving themselves grades. It's very interesting when you, some of the things that I've been reading about that really involves the students much more in the assessment and how much more meaningful it becomes. Lee says she remembers one of her sons assessing the other student's behavior in challenge A rather than doing his blue book. That sounds like a fun story. And she said that she also had a lot of students that treated it like a sports championship, right? So yeah, so there's a lot of every being cries out silently to be read differently by Simone, quote there from Simone Weil, right? That we all want to be noticed. And that's one of the things in assessment is that idea that, right, somebody is noticing what we're doing and cares about what we're doing, right? And then there's that old fashioned, right? Inspect what you expect. So, all right. Does anybody have anything just about assessment in general that they'd like to share before we go on? Because I always just love talking and then we run out of time. All right. I can't tell if it's taking its time or if I need to click again. There we go. All right, so we talked about this last week. I'm just going to quickly review it in case anybody wasn't there or has questions. This time next year, so 1 year from now, the goal is that we will have available for purchase the complex domain as the complete curriculum. That will be 30 weekly booklets. So there'll be individual booklets, one per week, 30 weeks. And those booklets will have everything you need for the week in it. So they will have the 4-page chart that is sort of your reference material for the week, as well as your, I like to think of it as like your inset map, right, for that topic, that sort of where you blow things up and you go, okay, here's my maps topic. So you can see what you're doing and how that fits into the bigger picture. It will have the art, the quotation, and the reflection. It'll have the contribution to the conversation that's currently available with the beta materials will be in that booklet. The solutions will be in that booklet. A game will be on the back of that booklet. So everything you need for that week will be in that booklet. That will be for sale next spring. We will also have additional flashcards that we're working on that will be available. And we're also working on an art book. So this time next year, the goal is to have those available for purchase. Now, in the coming year, we still have the naturals beta that will be available on CC Connected, but next summer, that will go away. And instead, we will have the digits, which is our very first domain. We'll have the fractions, which is sort of like the beginning of essentials-ish, that domain. Those two domains, the lesson pages only for those will be available online. And then the Compass, which is a digital encyclopedia, teacher's guide, sort of everything will be available. All the extra resources will be available through the Compass. And so you'll be able to click through and find things that match your book that way. So we're working diligently to have these materials ready. And then after, as we get this done, right, we're going to be working on cascading through monomials up to the transcendentals through challenge A, and also building in those earlier years. So this time next year, there will be a domain available for each sort of level of your family. And then within a few years' time, we'll have 13 domains available for people to progress through. So any questions on the timeline or the launch? All right. So here we go, down just for you. When we talk about assessment, and specifically when we talk about math assessment, one of the things that we've done is we've said, look, we've got these 15 classical tools, and they're tools for learning, but we can also use them as tools for assessment. And what we have put in the chart are habits, right? Our 5 core habits, that those kind of suggest activities, right? Our common topics suggest questions, and our canons suggest conversations, right? And I just want to say all students, right, can be accessed using a mixture of all 3 of these, right? So your challenge 4 student should be able to name things and attend to things and memorize things and express things and storytell. But you can also have a conversation with your littlest one, right? Drawing some of the questions out, right? And even though we tend to think they go in those stages, right? We're all learners, so we're all in all of these stages as we grow. We just know that predominantly our little ones do better, right, with sort of the habits and so forth as we move through. So I just thought for the rest of our time together tonight, I wanted to invite you to think, how could you use these 15 classical tools, right? So pick a habit or a topic or a canon, and say, how would you use that for assessment? And you can think little kid, you can think old kid. Just think, right? How could you use naming or comparison or relationship or delivery, right, as part of your assessment?
I was just thinking of the other week when you put a circle up there and you just had us tell you everything we knew. And so that was naming. We were also attending to it. We were drawing on our memoria and defining some things. Is we were comparing the word, I think it was radius or diameter, maybe. Do you guys remember that? We were comparing these 2 words that were the same, but had kind of a different meaning depending on the circumstance they were used in. So anyway, just used a whole bunch of those in that particular lesson, I remember.
Good.
I did an entire paper on how to use the 5 common topics as assessment. And I think that's one of those things. I think even if we haven't read a book or we haven't done something, we can ask our students about it. And the way they answer tells me if they know the answer or if they're fishing or lying. If you ask them, well, explain a vector to me. That's definition, define a vector, tell me what it is. And if they're hemming and hawing and they don't really know and they're questioning themselves and they don't know what a vector is yet. And we need to go back and do that. It's a conversation, and it doesn't make them feel bad. It's just, okay, so you don't know that. Let's go back, and see what is it. Same with comparison. If you can't compare the 2 things, then do you really know either one? So yeah, just using those questions, using 5 common topics questions is very natural for assessment, in my opinion.
Right. But maybe it does go back once again. Do they not know what the thing is? Or do they not have the words to define it? Or do they, like, a lot of times in my class, I'll say, okay, what is a linear equation? Well, it's the equation of a line. Okay. I mean, they know in their head what this thing is, or what's a square root, and they know it. They'll give me examples a lot of times instead of giving me a definition. And so sometimes it's that they just don't know how to say what the thing is. So that's a separate skill.
But if you're giving examples, then you do know what it is. You just need the vocabulary to give the definition. Right. And so then the assessment is, okay, you know what it is, but let's go back and let's look at better vocabulary for what it is.
Right. Right.
I want to piggyback on what Michelle said now that my sound's working. Can you hear me?
We can, yay.
I can hear you. There's an internal button off. It's really hard to ask clear questions, and they're children. They want to please us, and one of the things that's really a gift to them is when they really do know what you're going to expect. Because then you're not assessing what they know, you're assessing, can they guess what I mean?
Huh.
Like even the example you gave, Jenny, when you said, you ask what's a linear equation, like, what do you want from me? Is it linear equation, something I don't understand? Linear equation, is that Greek? They're not even thinking, oh, what's the math definition that you're asking me about that? Or what are the symbols that go along with it? There's so many answers to that question.
And I really just wanted, we had discussed it the week before, and I really just wanted them to tell me everything they knew about it. But you're right. I am a terrible question asker. I hate to admit that, but I've been doing directing challenge for years now. And I am still like, either I ask leading questions or I ask questions like you just said that are way too vague and
Hard.
working on it.
Well, and so I'm just going to put something here, right? So 3 + 2 = 5. Right. If I said to you, name the addends, right? Now I'm being specific and I'm saying name the addends. What would the addends be?
3 and 2.
3 and 2, right? If I said, okay, I want you to attend to the sign of these numbers, right? Are they positive or negative? Now you've got to kind of attend, right? You got to look a little bit closer. And what would that be?
There's 3
They're
positive.
both positive.
Right? They're all positive numbers, right? Now, and there's a great question, right? And I might then go and ask a question. Okay, so how do you know that? What circumstance tells me that they're positive? Right?
The lack of a sign.
The lack of a sign, right? There's this hidden positive sign, right? Which we do so often in mathematics, right? We just hide things, right? So I had to really attend because it was hidden, right? If I was about to cover up my screen with my hand. Right, if I covered up the 5, so picture my hand is there and I said, what's 3 + 2? Would most of them have that memorized?
I would say natural numbers or operands or addends, right? But you want me to say 5, right? That's one of the examples where it's hard.
Is hard, right? But that could be memoria, or what Lee just said, right? They're natural numbers. That could be memoria, right? I memorized that those are natural numbers, right? We've talked about circumstance, right? We might talk about definition and say, okay, well, how do I define addition? That's a little bit harder.
Because almost every word you use would be a synonym, and if you don't have the synonyms, you still aren't defining it. Like if I said, is the sum or putting together.
So there, Jana, there's a question, right? Do you have the words to explain what addition is? Right? So there I might say, okay, I want you to define addition, but you can use a picture.
3 apples + 2 apples.
Right? I might actually draw pictures, and that might help me to define something. Right? So a lot of times when we think define, we think words. And so maybe we give them that opportunity to use pictures, right, in order to define it.
Kirsty, I realize that's somewhere where we got to be a little clearer, because I could say to you, well, that's a picture or an image of a 3 in front of me.
That's true.
Right, where you meant the apples. Yeah. So we're trying to do that in the curriculum, but I every now and then when you said that, I went, oh, I can think of places where I wasn't clear.
Now, my son just read Animal Farm, which took me back to my days of reading 1984, because we read it in 1984. So we all thought that was really significant. But if you've read 1984, right? That was the big thing, right? 2 + 2 = 5. That was the whole, like, we know we've got control with you when you'll say that 2 = 2 = 5. So here's a great opportunity to talk about, right, testimony and authority. Right? Like, who gets to say that 2 + 2 = 5 or 3 + 2 = 5? Right? Can we change it? Right. So there's a whole, and I would say that's probably a question for older students, right? But there's a fun testimony and authority question, right? So who gets to say that? I'm going to erase that so that nobody thinks I'm actually, oops.
We just had Animal Farm this past week in class, and we tried to write a we tried to write an equation for the statement, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. We tried to represent that with like symbols and other words. It's illogical, so we weren't able to, but
Now, I would say that, right, we've got this. But I was a classroom math teacher. So I've seen all kinds of things, right? For some students, this right there is really important, right? If you have students that are like, maybe have a piece of paper like this and they're doing like this on top and their work is just all over the place, maybe one of the things you're looking at is delivery, right? Did you turn in a neat paper? Or maybe it was something like this. Whatever this equals, right? I'm just gonna not even work this out. But whatever this would equal here, right? Did they just write that, or did they show all of their work? Were they clear in showing their steps, right? That's a delivery, right? Or perhaps, right, elocution might be, did they answer the question? Right. So Jenna, you're like, okay, I'm asking these hard questions, but maybe you said to them, give me the equation of a line through these 2 points, but instead they wrote out what a linear equation was. Did they answer your question? Right. So when we start talking about the canons, right, we can, even with our little ones, right, we can talk about delivery. Was your work neat and organized? We could talk about elocution. Did you answer the question that was being asked? Right? Did you get your answer correct? Right? So all of these, right, we can use even on 2 + 3 = 5, where we can pull out, right? For little ones, right, going back to when we talked about how would you define addition, that might be a great place for storytelling, right? Can you tell me a story about 2 + 3 = 5?
I really like these ideas. I think this is awesome because it goes beyond what have you memorized and just completing a lot of what are these calculations, especially memorized calculations, but the thinking behind it. I think that's a much truer assessment.
I think so. I'm going to say this, and I'm hopefully I'm saying what I'm thinking. Right, that traditionally, when people think of math assessment, what do you think of? Traditionally, calculations.
Yeah.
Right.
A page full of numbers that I have to, with equal signs that I have to fill in the equal signs.
Yes, right. So we're pages and pages, right? In it, lots of things. If you're not a strong calculator, is that a good assessment of what you know?
Or a good assessment of what you should be working on, but not what you've already accomplished or what you
Not
know.
what you've accomplished, right? So I think one of the things that we're trying to do through the math map is show that there are concepts that we can learn, there's grammar that we can learn, and there's calculations. And all right, a whole math student is going to know the concepts and be able to calculate, right? We're going to be able to do both. I don't want to say one is more important than the other, but traditionally, right, a lot of our assessments are heavy on the calculation side. And so a student who maybe gets it and has the concepts, but doesn't calculate well, this piece of what they know is lost, right? If they're not calculating well. And so we want to be able to encourage them both. And just because a kid can calculate well, right? And again, this I draw from my experience. One year I taught geometry and I had an 8th grader in my geometry class, and he did not belong there because he was really strong at memorizing things. But he was not ready for that sort of spatial work that we were doing with geometry, because he was in a class with sophomores and juniors who were ready to go and have these deeper thoughts, right? And you could really see this split between them. And so he was an excellent calculator. He didn't get the concepts, right? So sometimes, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do in the math map by introducing all this grammar is say, hey, here's all these concepts, and we can explore these concepts over here, even if you're not ready to do all the calculations over here, right? And we're gonna eventually bring all of these pieces together, and you're gonna do both. But in our assessment, I think it's important for us, right, Jill? What you just said, like all these different ways. Tell a story about 2 + 3 = 5, right? There's different ways
Kirsty,
to do that.
we're about out of time. I wanted to give you a chance to say anything you wanted to say to kind of end this first semester review. I'll make sure you had a minute. Can you give us some assessment on how it went?
Well, so my self-assessment is I always get on my soapbox and I get too excited and I talk too much. All right, so there's my self-assessment. But I have loved the fact that so many of you have become more participatory since we started. And I love the participation and the willingness to jump in and try. And so I hope that you're all going to come back in August, because Lee and I talk all the time about these math ideas, and it's fun and we can talk for hours, but it's so much fun when we have you guys participating and jumping in. So
yeah,
August 21st, it's not on your calendar, put it there. And I would just encourage you, put this note here. I would just encourage you, right, that we've given you some tools, right? Not a lot, right? There's a whole bunch more tools out there. But spend your summer looking for the unseen math, right? In all that you do and everywhere that you go. And ultimately, right, what our goal is that by training yourself to look for the unseen math, you're also going to start to see where God is in all of creation and everything that you do, and how God is revealing himself through that mathematics. And so enjoy your summer having fun with math, right? Which may be telling stories about addition, or recognizing the beauty of a rainbow. Just enjoy that.
all right. It was really good to get to know you all better. Kirsty's had that privilege a lot more than I have, because some of you are in her masters and she's been with the pilot. And I want to thank you. It's one of my favorite hours of the week, except for the 4 hours every morning that I'm doing math problems with the whole team. So we look forward to seeing you in August. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Good.
Thank you all.
Have a wonderful summer. We'll see you in May.
Yes. All right, Julie, you got to edit out these last couple of minutes where I couldn't figure out how to get out of the call.